Hello, everyone. Welcome to NPU's Nightly Restorative Check-In. I am Dr. Enjolie LaFerrie, for those of you who don't know me. Today is, I didn't edit the date, you guys, but anyway, it's November 6th. And all of us are still waiting to know who the president is, although it's seeming to kind of be rather obvious. We're all still waiting. But anyway, for those of you who it's your first time with me, I am actually in Arizona. I'm in this beautiful Sonoran desert on autumn land. The Nightly Restorative Check-In is the brainchild of Marisol Quevedo. She hosts the shows on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I host it here on Fridays. The way that I think of the Nightly Restorative Check-In is I think about what I want to be doing on Friday, right? And that Friday is I want to eat good food. I want to be kind of with my people. And it's that time for all of us to kind of have somebody really ask how we're doing and where we can download for the week. I think of parents, caregivers, educators, right? All of us who play such an important role to other people in our life. So I originally was one of the first guests on Marisol's show, and she brought me on because I'm a psychologist, a hypnotherapist, and also I teach as a professor. And so on one of the first shows, I brought up I taught a breathing technique titled 478. And I want to maintain the integrity of the show between Mondays and Wednesdays to Friday. So we continue to do that. The way that that technique operates is you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then you exhale for 8 seconds. And you do that 4 times around. On the inhale for 4 seconds, it's kind of like taking the breath in pretty quickly. And when you're exhaling for that 8 seconds, if you can imagine kind of holding your breath while you're exhaling, you really want to do your best to extend that breath out for those 8 seconds as much as you possibly can. I will count it out for you so you don't have to count for yourself. If it's your first time with this breath pattern, it may feel a little unnatural, but once you try it a few times, it becomes like second nature. This breath pattern is really effective to reduce anxiety. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you're having trouble falling back to sleep, that's a good way to use it. In fact, that's how Marisol uses it. I use it as this breath pattern to arrive, to kind of just mentally, emotionally kind of get all parts of me present. That's how I use it. And so that's also how I think about it for the sake of the show and all of us arriving together. Okay, and so those of you who know me know that I need to like calm down for a second before I lead us through this, because I have a lot of energy going forward to greet you, and then now I got to bring it back in. All right, so I usually recommend that you close your eyes or kind of cast your gaze downward, look at your lap or the floor, and that's just so that you don't get distracted. Go ahead and start by just taking a natural breath in through your nose, out through your mouth or nose. And on your next inhale, inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I think that was good for most of you. And I say that because like on this last breath, I felt my shoulders drop. I felt my back relax. We all have different ways that we recognize, or that our body tells us that we've moved into out of a stress response into a relaxation response. And that kind of release in your body, right, is actually a really good indicator. That felt good. Okay. I get jealous of you guys because recently on Tuesday, Marisol and I did a special election show, and no, it wasn't that day. Anyway, sorry. It was another day this week that she and I were together. We're together too much. And I got to experience the breath pattern instead of delivering it or guiding it. And I just got to feel how good it is. So anyway, it just makes me feel good. All right. So I've introduced myself professionally. Let me kind of speak to a little bit more of who I am. I'm originally from Southern California. My background is that my father comes from Cuba, so we're Afro-Cuban from Taino and Arawak descent. My mom's from Guatemala, so we come from Maya territory. Some of you have met my siblings. They were some of the first guests on my show. I'm a mom. I have a daughter. She's 20. Oh gosh, she's almost going to be 21 in like 2 weeks. And another identity that's particularly important to me is that I'm a widow. As far as my community here in Arizona, I'm a member of the Siwapatli Collective. So we are a nonprofit that focuses on supporting Indigenous women and their families. And we say that we support them from womb to tomb. And many of you have seen various comadres, various sisters, right, from the collective appear here on this show. So today, I want to introduce Dr. Jaseon Outlaw. He is an Oakland-based licensed psychologist, and he's the clinical director of Journey of Life Counseling and Assessment Services. He actually received his doctoral training at ASU, where he researched academic persistence. It's actually where we met, and we'll talk about that and give you the story. His professional training has also continued at Butler University with Behavior Corp and at the University of Houston, all within kind of clinical settings. He previously chaired the Alameda County Mental Health Board, and I'm just so excited to have him here, and it's so nice to be back with sharing space with you. You're going to feel like I just did something to change the screen, and I did, because it's the way that it looks for me. How are you, Jaseon?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm glad that I get an opportunity to speak with you and also to your audience. And so it's always a pleasure for me to get a chance to speak with folks and talk a little bit of mental health and, of course, talk about some things that are relevant in our lives. So I appreciate you inviting me to the show.
Of course. And I should Dr. Outlaw you, because you actually have no offense. No offense. You have the coolest name, actually. So I don't want to minimize your title.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I get comments about my name literally every day. When I was younger, and you kind of get used to submitting your ID and your debit card for certain things, it kind of struck me as odd. But if I go out, literally, I'm going to get at least one comment about my name. And so there's certain places in the country where the outlaws are rather abundant. North Carolina is actually the place where we come from. And then everywhere else, people are like, wow, did you make that name up? Or is this your nickname? And so it's always interesting to hear people's thoughts about my last name.
Yes. And we were talking about your first name. And so let's pronounce it correctly, because it's not Jason. It's not a typo. It's Jaseon, which is also a beautiful name too. I probably never told you that I love your name, but yeah.
I appreciate that. No, unique names, in my opinion, they create personality and character. And so especially really unique names. And now there are a couple Jaseons in the world, but very infrequently will you hear Jaseon who? Which one are you talking about? So I make it an effort whenever my name is purposely given to make sure that the correct pronunciation is given. And my name does not have some super unique background behind it. No real meaning. My parents just said that they got creative and they like Jason, but they wanted to be a little bit different. And I personally say that the E stands for excellence, not in a conceited sort of way, but more in I try to exude excellence in my lifestyle.
I bet you do. No, you've always been super chill. You definitely do a good job of kind of knowing who you are and your worth, but also having a humility behind it.
Sure.
All right. So we've talked about who you are professionally. You also told us you're from North Carolina. Are there any other parts of who you are that you'd like to introduce the audience to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say certainly career is going to be a biggie because we spend so much time doing, excuse me, whatever it is that we do for career. So,
Mm,
Monday through Thursday and some Fridays, I am completely doing clinical work, and at times I will also kind of be on call for different things regarding the two clinics that I run. But above and beyond that, I know we're going to talk about this later, but I have a huge connection with just reducing stigma within the mental health community in general. I mean, you can think back to certain movies where someone with a disorder of some sort, they call them crazy or retarded or all these different labels to identify and differentiate one person from another. And I feel like as a culture and as a country that we've gotten a little bit better. We've gotten moved the needle a little bit there, but there certainly is a lot of room to be made. So that's another part of my identity, another hat that I wear is I just try to do whatever it is that I can do to reduce the stigma of mental health in general. And sometimes that's merely sharing information. Sometimes that's doing a talk or a panel or whatever it is. But I feel like when people see folks like you and I who are talking about mental health, whether it's from a treatment perspective or a client perspective, people then start to think differently about it.
mhm,
So I certainly do that. So that's kind of related to career. But I'm
mhm,
also a golfer.
mhm.
You and I kind of talked about this in pre-show here, but
Those are the
I've
other
been golf.
Fridays.
Correct.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I've been golfing since I was 9 years old, and so the
Wow.
only reason why I even golf is because I grew up one of the cross streets. So where I grew up is called Golf Links Road, and there's a
Mm.
golf course at the end of the road, and we used to kind of screw around when we were younger to see who can hit the ball the furthest. And then we got lessons, and I started working there when I was 14, and I played in high school. Not sure if you knew this, but I actually was on a golf scholarship as an undergrad.
I was
And
wondering.
yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things where I potentially could have gone pro, but you have to like give up your life to do that. But anyways, the reason why, or one of the other reasons why I really like golf as an adult is that we have a lot of camaraderie. I actually play with a group that's predominantly Black, and
Mm.
there's about 100 of us. And so at any given time, there's 13 groups, 14 groups of Black men and some others as well that are on the golf course kind of competing for fun and trying to beat their best score. So that's another huge hat that I have as well.
Actually, it's I'm learning about you, and then or some holes are being filled in for me about you, right?
Mhm.
I actually resonate. I resonate with what you're saying about. You didn't say it this way, but that there's this choice that you have to make. I think around kind of high school, college age.
Sure.
Do you want to pursue something more,
Mhm.
or do you want to go down an academic or
Mhm.
career space or career focus? I played soccer competitively, and I did
I
Olympic
can't remember
development.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I did Olympic development,
Wow.
and I got injured at different times, and they were injuries that were nagging injuries, and I knew
Mm.
that I wasn't okay. And
Mhm.
so I remember, like, I was in high school and I decided, like, I'm not going to go down this route in college, and like, I'm not going to try for it anymore.
Sure.
And
Sure.
my dad was really upset about that. And it's
Mm.
because I knew I wanted a PhD. Like, there were a lot of
Wow.
things I
Even
knew
back then.
that. Yes, I knew early. I knew early. And so anyway, I knew I wanted to kind of go down this route, and I felt that there was also the potential that I was going to have to pay for it, which
Mhm.
happened. And so I was like, I just didn't see it. I didn't see the reason why I should pursue an athletic career, especially because as a woman, there was no wasn't the women a women's league afterwards. So
Sure.
anyway,
Sure.
just where your story is like really hitting on just an experience actually that I faced as well.
Definitely.
So.
Definitely.
Okay, so aside from kind of getting to know who you are too, how are you, right? We usually play around with when I ask this, but I really want to check in with my guests, right? So, how is your life? How are things going? How are you today? Wherever you'd like to take that response.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you introduced the show today with talking about a bit of where we are with respect to the election.
Mm,
And the honest reality is that there are people who make the decision to support Donald Trump, sometimes primarily for tax breaks or some form of a financial benefit. And it really is really difficult for me. I mean, I see that as a very selfish act, but it also, even just thinking that way, that identifies my own personal financial privilege, because there's some people where the
Mhm.
difference between them having Christmas and not, or being able to pay their rent and not, is that extra $7,000 that they might get from, some tax break in his policy. But in general, it's been very, very tough. I've identified some people who I know that don't fall into the category I just described,
Mhm.
that have justified and finagled their way into figuring out why Donald Trump is their man or their person. And don't get me wrong, I mean, people can choose who they want to choose, but for me personally, a lot of what he's stood for has been against my own personal morals. So I really wanted the opposite candidate to win, so that potentially the country can kind of go back to a place where respect and dignity and honor for the position would be the thing. And feels like we're going that direction. So I'm optimistic about it. Some healthy optimism with a little bit of pessimism, knowing that there can be some legality involved in terms of where we go with that. So that's one thing that certainly is on my mind.
Mhm.
The other piece, and you and I talked about this in our pre-call as well, but I had a recent breakup, and as much as um, it's easy for us all to say, well, breakups happen and people are not going to, all good things come to an end. It's been really tough for me. I'll be completely honest with you. It's
Mhm.
been really, really tough for me. And I've had to engage in my own personal process. And much like when I'm working with clients, they want to avoid the heck out of it and not think about it, not talk about it, and hope that it goes away. And I understand that that very much is not the thing to do. So I've had to engage in a lot of journaling and a lot of talk. I mean, I've talked to so many people about it that I'm
Mhm.
sure that they are tired of talking to me about it, and tired of
That's
hearing
good.
about it. And
That's
so,
good.
but no, it's been really rough. And our society wants men to be strong and to make it through anything, and to put on this false front as if we can kind of make it through anything and everything. But when it really comes down to it, I've been honest with myself, and I'm still going through it, still going through my process. I don't think that that's going to all of a sudden end, and it's been really rough. And so to answer your question, I'm in the midst of trying to kind of gain my own personal self back, and golf does help. I will say that
Mhm.
my place in on the golf course and being out there in the open, that does help, but it doesn't solve all my problems, clearly.
No, but it's a good escape and it's a good use of redirection, right? Redirecting of some energies, and like you said, and coming back into yourself. And so, thank you, Jaseon, for being vulnerable. And I mean, obviously, I knew, and because we talked about it, but I just, I want to applaud and acknowledge that you guys, on top of the fact that, like, yes, we're two young black and brown individuals here on a screen with PhDs, and that's cool, and we normalize something that's not common. You're also doing that by normalizing doing something that's uncommon, meaning having men like be so open, right, about
Sure,
what's going on in their life and
sure.
discussing, feelings and emotions. Because usually we would hear like a woman maybe kind of discussing this, and so I just applaud you, and I know that it's also, I imagine, I should say, that it's motivated by your work, right?
Of
And
course.
wanting to reduce stigma around, like, yeah, guys feel too,
Yeah, yeah.
and of course they do, but we don't talk about it.
This is very true. I mean, and even just the process of talking about it openly and recognizing that this is and will continue to be a tough place in my life. A lot of people, I'm hoping that other people are able to see some benefit from that. And then it's also, just my personal reality on top
Mhm.
of it, loaded into kind of stigma reduction. But, any loss that you have, whether it's someone passes away, whether someone moves away, this was your best friend, or whether this is a relationship, we all tend to kind of go through some of those stages of loss and grief. And I can certainly empathize with that. Not that I have not ever had loss before, but there also is something to be said about just kind of that selective sort of loss where one individual makes a decision that they want to kind of, you know, break things off. And so, you know, it can be humbling, right? Like we like to think of ourselves as very much people who are admirable and wanted and so forth. But we all can be humbled by many things in life, including breakup.
Definitely, definitely. Well, thank you again. Thank you for sharing. And then there's a part of me that like wants to like sister you and take care of you, be like, you're good, you know? Um, but um, but yeah, I just appreciate you sharing. Okay, so let's get into how we know one another, which I don't know if it's obvious or not, but I will share kind of my version of we met in graduate school, and you were at least a year, if not 2 years ahead of me. So we didn't get to sit a ton in classes together, although we did. I remember bio bases with you,
Okay.
but you're like, I don't remember that. Kidding.
I remember the course. I don't remember not one student in that class. And so your long-term memory is much better than mine.
LTM, yeah. Okay, so anyway, yeah. So anyway, I just remember different classes, but I remember actually we had more touch points in like the Black Graduate Student Association. So in kind of these
Sure.
social spaces, and when I think of like where you fit into the landscape of my graduate, school career, that's kind of where I see you. Is there anything that you think I'm forgetting with the context behind that story?
Yeah, no, I think it fits. And you're right. We probably, uh, I ended in 2008. That doesn't necessarily tell us when we both came in, but I feel like it was at least one. It may have been 2 years as well. So, you know how that goes when you're in grad school and you're like, well, I'm just trying to get the heck out of here. Right.
Yes.
And so the new people kind of come in and you want to interact and kind of have a little bit of a relationship with them on a professional level. But from what I remember, it certainly was kind of on my way of like, let me get this dissertation done. Let me
Yes.
figure out where I'm going to go for internship and knock it out. But definitely you referred to, and I hadn't thought about that in our relationship, but the Black Graduate Student Association. And there were all sorts of graduate student associations as well. But we were, I think maybe the year before you came in, we had just reinvented it.
Mm.
And it was with, I don't know if you remember Sedella Blatch,
Uh-huh.
but she was kind of the one who was the spearheader of it. And I remember going into a meeting where she had just kind of restarted it, and there were like four of us there. And so she kind of had a bit of a vision for it. And she was from East Coast somewhere. And I was brand new, to the campus. And we said, well, we're going to do this. And then after about a year, we had like 30, 40 people, and we were like really enjoying ourselves. And it was part of our saving grace of being
Yeah.
in a place that didn't have a lot of color. Now, Arizona is doing pretty well in the election, so I got to give Arizona its props for that alone. But certainly that's another piece that I remember. And of course, we did things that were social in nature, which was a part of the process of staying sane while in graduate school. But
Mm-hmm.
we also had really cool events. I remember trying to think of what the research conference that we had was called. It's on the tip of my tongue here. It's like bridging the gap of the threads, or it's something to that nature. Do you recall by any chance?
Was it through our counseling center or through the campus? Because there was one that I coordinated. So we're like going so far back down memory lane. People are like, what the heck?
True.
But
And so
yeah.
the title may not even make that big of a difference, but we also had that within the Black Graduate Student Association. It was a merging of the minds. That's what it was called. Merging of the minds was where, since people were coming from all different types of programs, they would bring not like hardcore, I can't understand it research, but some stuff that they could bring that people who are in other disciplines can appreciate and understand. And one of them that I remember, I believe it was, I don't remember who it was, but maybe it was Adela. She talked about vitamins and kind of how it breaks down in the body. And I thought that was really cool too. And of course we did our, a little easier to do kind of counseling sort of work and things around social sciences. But that was just kind of another example of how we merged together and interacted during graduate school at younger time of our lives.
It was, yes. We just nerded out, yes. And I think there were multiple years, and so there was one year actually where I chaired it, but I don't think it was this year because
Okay.
Sadella and I. So anyway, whatever. Okay, all these names. Sorry. This is what we did. We just nerded out, but it was what you're seeing, and I think what people experience on the show, it was that community, and it was like being excited, right? Being at these
Sure.
levels and finding people that looked like us. That were also kind of excelling in their academic success, and in their careers. So let's kind of move into, right, what our main topic is, that of kind of reducing stigma or stigma reduction around mental health issues. Yeah, you've mentioned it already, that it's a passion for you. Can I ask, where did that passion come from? Like, what's the motivation or the why?
I feel as if it was kind of organic, and I'm not sure that I can pinpoint exactly when, but I do know even to this day, when I tell people what I do, whether it's in my golf group or just anywhere outside of the clinic, um, people in kind of a semi facetious sort of way will say, "Oh, you work with those crazy people." Right. And they say it kind of in a way to try to connect. And, I try not to go there too much, but it
Mm,
just kind of underscores the fact that the general population kind of thinks that you have to be really severe of a presentation to even require or seek out mental health services. And
yeah.
so my response is usually, well, I got a couple people who fit into what you're talking about, but most of the people who are in my clinic look just like you and I. And they may be going through relationship issues. They may be going through work related stress. They might be going through a period of a mood disorder, whether it's based on their own um, genetics or if it's based on something situational. And so I say, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between you and I and someone who comes to my clinic. And I feel like when I have that conversation, it kind of clicks in their mind that, oh, wow, I guess it's a little broader than what I really thought. And then just the concept of outpatient versus inpatient, intensive outpatient, and all the different types of modalities that you can kind of give. I tried to do my best to kind of educate people to a point where they will be able to take something away and use it at a later date. So I feel like that's probably where it started. It's like I need to kind of educate people a little bit more, and psychoeducation is a buzzword we use in our field,
Mhm.
and then it just kind of morphed into, especially like COVID. All of a sudden, instead of us being able to go to conventions and conferences and places where it's natural for us to kind of talk about what we do, now we can have these video sorts of meetings and reach the masses. People can be in their home, on their phone, or wherever, and receive and digest information that's very much relevant. So I've done maybe in COVID, I feel like I've done like 10 of these,
Mm.
and maybe even more than that. But ultimately, my goal is to just share information. And I'm sure you've probably had the correct people on this too. But I've had even clients who have contacted me and said, "Well, I have manic depressive and I have bipolar disorder." And it's like, okay, let's talk about that for one. Those are the same thing. You don't have two different disorders, just a different version of our book that we were going off. But even something as simple as that, for people to know that, oh, I thought I had two different disorders. That is educational in nature, and ultimately can hopefully benefit some people down the line too.
Yeah, it is. I feel like in some ways it's the positive of all the technology and the access we have to information, but at the same time, right, sometimes people don't really know how to access it correctly or how to distinguish, right, what is the correct information. And there is a lot of self-diagnosing that goes on, which I don't think is a bad thing, but it just, it makes for an interesting conversation of to start off, right, a therapy
True.
session or to start working with a client, for sure. Um, there were kind of different kind of questions that I had, but when you started talking about the way that people respond to you as a psychologist, it made me think again of like gender, of that, the fact
Mhm.
of that people probably don't expect you as a Black man, right, to hold this role in this position. And then this role in this position require this conversation about emotion, this conversation about mental health, this conversation about internal processes, and that how much that like must go against a guy code, you know, for you to even like say this is my job, you know?
Yeah. Well, I like to think of myself as someone who goes against the grain in some ways, particularly when it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, within the different circles that I have, people have reached out to me, not necessarily for professional sort of work, but to ask questions and to seek information. And I do feel like a little bit of that kind of guy code and that machismo version of I can handle anything and it's brush this off my shoulders. Yeah, there's even now I think about it, there's even a song
Yep.
called brush it off my shoulders, just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
underscore society's version or view that as men we're supposed to be focused on this and anything else is peripheral to it, and
Right.
you need to get over that, right? Like you that's for women to sit in their emotions and to process their emotions. Men, we need to just tough it out. And so within my circle, I feel like I've done a decent job of kind of normalizing that. And I've given lots of referrals, and some therapists within my office have seen people who, are friends of friends as well. So definitely it's a lot of work, right? Don't get
Yes.
me wrong. Like even just being away from a clinic and someone asking you a question that requires you to kind of turn that light switch back on, we don't always want to do that. Sometimes, you turn it off and you try to ask for that certain respect, but it definitely can continue in different capacities.
So aside from kind of saying this is who I am, saying right these are the experiences, kind of normalizing is kind of our psychological word. What are some other ways that are effective for reducing stigma?
Well, I say there's lots of things that we can all do. And from a professional standpoint, certainly disqualifies, and anything that we do, sharing information and so forth, that all qualifies. And so I like to think of it from different perspectives. But I say one of the biggest things that can be done, and maybe we're modeling this today, or I've modeled that earlier, is when you are going through some form of a tough time, um, and you sought out treatment for that, talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that you need to talk about the details and I did this and I thought that and my therapist said this. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but just having conversations that normalize mental health treatment can turn a knob in other people's minds, and they can say, well, I guess when I go through something, that's an option for me too. But if they don't know anyone at all who has ever sought mental health treatment out, they very well may say it's just for the crazy people. And so if, for example, in my case, I were to talk with someone and say, well, you know what, I had this breakup recently, and I am, speaking with someone about that and helping me go through my own process, they may say, well, what do you mean? Like, did breakups happen? And,
Mm-hmm.
like that doesn't, you're going to a psychologist for that. Right. And so that conversation is stigma reducing in and of itself. And so I really think that just by us talking about our own personal experiences, that does a lot. So sharing information, I think is a big one. Talking about our own personal struggles, and no matter what capacity, I think that is very much related as well. Um, we've of course, you see online, I think this is an area of progress. Sometimes you'll see people, whether for their birthday or some holiday, they're raising money
Mm-hmm.
for their own personal nonprofit. And I've seen a lot of times people will raise money for NAMI or their local mental health organizations. And so I think that's huge. I love to hear that when people do that. And that's yet another way in which we can kind of chip away a bit at the stigma.
I want to acknowledge we have a lot of people saying hey, and so Maritza, Judith, Dorian, Atira, Demetrius, my mom. Hey,
Oh,
everybody.
wow.
Yeah, there's lots of
Hello, everyone out there in the land of the video. And I guess it's not really video. We're live in essence. And so this is a different way of looking at it. Can I
people.
say something as well before we move on?
Please.
One thing, and I don't know if there's any research on it. I haven't read anything about it, but there's been a lot of talk prior to Affordable Care Act about mental health stigma within the African American community and within most communities of color. And when you really think about it, a lot of people didn't have access to care, right? And so if you don't have access to care, you don't have health insurance to be able to get that treatment, it's a lot easier to avoid treatment and to not even consider treatment, and just, it's outside of my scope of what I can do for myself and my family. Why am I even going to think about that? It's my personal belief, and this is kind of anecdotal information more than anything, but I think that a lot of people had kind of a pseudo mental health stigma. And don't get me wrong, stigma exists as well, but I think it was kind of complemented by lack of access to care. So therefore, when Affordable Care Act kicked in my clinics, I noticed that all of a sudden, out the woodworks, all sort of people of color were coming for mental health services. And so it wasn't, I'm not doing research at that point, but I was very much curious, like, had you been wanting treatment this whole time, or just because? Anyways, that's kind of a point that I wanted to make. And I think that that's important in this world right now, where we're, depending on what happens with these races, nothing is guaranteed. That if a certain portion of the population no longer has health care, we can go back a little bit in terms of people really not having access to care, and a little bit of the facet of the stigma kind of kicking back in. But I don't know if you've thought about that before, but it's definitely something that I've considered.
Well, I haven't thought about it in that way of more people accessing, but it makes me think back to stigma, right? And stigma, when we look at stigma by race, right? So for in many communities, I was just going to say Black and brown, but I'm also thinking Asian communities, right? There's lots of communities where we are told that there are different things that we are supposed to do with our problems, especially if the problems relate to our family, right? So that idea of praying about it, right? Which is, it's wonderful to pray. I'm the first one that's going to pray. But you can pray and still go to your therapist too. Like, they're not contradictory, right? And then I also recognize the history behind our field, right? That our field has been like, we are associated with medicine, right? Psychology is associated with medicine, that it has done harm, and has done harm in these communities. So there is distrust, right? And mistrust. But that's wonderful too, that then we can see when people have more access, again, normalized. Like, that's like probably one of my favorite words. The more something is normalized, the more it doesn't look like something that white people do, or that rich people do, or that, I don't know, whatever people do, then people get to benefit from all this. And I'm sure you agree with me, like, this is such a basic need to attend to our mental health.
It is. I mean, I don't think the audience needs me to say this, but you can survive without an arm. You can survive without a leg. You can survive without many of your organs, but you cannot survive without your mind and your brain and your central nervous system. Once that goes awry, then you're looking at death at that point. So it's very interesting that a lot of people, well, I guess it's just the strength of stigma, but a lot of people don't really see the connection or the importance between your own mental health. If once again, if you can live without an arm and leg or a foot or what have you, but you can't live without your central nervous system and your brain and your mind and your soul, it would almost make more sense that I will cultivate that, and I'll feed that, and I'll make sure that that's one of the healthiest organs in my body. But I don't really need, no one can see that I'm sick. No one can see that I have a learning disability. So therefore, I'm just going to coexist in the world. So interesting concept.
It is. It's one of those invisible identities. And actually, I'll even personalize with a story. So like I said, we started, I introduced saying that I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was 13, y'all. I was 13 saying I wanted to be a marriage therapist, right? And that never shifted. And that's uncommon in the sense of most people, when they're kind of in their teenage years, they change their mind several times on a career. I did not change my mind. And so I remember as I would go through my education, right, especially college years, my mom was kind of like, are you sure you want to do that? Or she had that face, you know, because I think in her mind, she only associated this work with one type of presentation or one type of location. And she'll be very honest. She's told this story before, so that's why I feel comfortable sharing it. She was concerned that I wasn't going to make any money. You know, she was concerned that she associated this work with social work and the humanitarian work that it's not, that is not adequately paid, adequately compensated, right?
Sure.
Of course, she feels differently now, you know, but that's another version of this stigma, right? So she didn't tell me not to do it, right? But there was this hesitation, and only because I'm strong-willed and my persistence, right? Did I say, no, I'm really confident that I want to do this, right? And no, I know that I want a PhD, so I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to follow the parameters of our family rules, right? But I'm going to do it in the way that makes sense for me.
Yeah, no, that totally counts. And so whether it's that, what you just described in terms of a concern for your own ability to provide resources, financial resources for yourself, but also I remember in grad school, and I'm not going to name names, but professors were like, you're not going to make a lot of money in this field. And that was almost like, I don't know if it was like in the learning objectives for them to like convince us that we weren't going to make a lot of money or what, but I remember them saying that. And most of our reasons for entering this field is not to make a lot of money. But then you also, like, I didn't think about this at that time, but relative to who? So a lot of money might be not a lot to you. And some of our professors had ranches and all kind of extra stuff. And, you know, they
We're
were,
not trying to name names, yeah.
you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So a lot of money to them might not be, but to us, I mean, for the most part, we want to be comfortable. We want to provide a service. But even with that line of thinking, it might steer people away from it. So that's a form of stigma, right? Like, oh, that field, you're not necessarily going to be, you know, sustainable financially. And so, well, I guess let me go be a professional athlete or let me be an entertainer. So we all just kind of have to be careful about the words that we use. And in essence, it can fit into that stigma category.
We do, and also even as you retell that, because I do remember that. I remember I used to hear that, and I was like, like, you know,
Okay.
because I just felt like you're not me, you know, and I still probably live my life that way too, right? You're not me, and as I'm thinking about it, even removing myself from it, and thinking about all the Black and brown folks that we went to school with, what it takes for folks to kind of achieve and persist and get to these levels, right, means that you're probably pretty resilient and innovative, and you might do things a little bit differently, you know? So yeah, how sad that, you know, our professors were putting kind of their experience in front of our own. And then also, I can also have compassion as a parent and compassion for other parents that we do that, right? We do that in an attempt to protect. We do that in a way to kind of set expectations. But then sometimes we're kind of like tainting their experience and what they're going to do with it, right?
This is true. This is true. And I think there's lots of effects of the general concept of stigma, but one of the, maybe we alluded to it at least briefly earlier, maybe not in this direct sort of context here, but mental health stigma in essence kind of reduces the normalization of us being vulnerable in society with our family and friends and other people as well, because maybe we don't want them to, I mean, it could be something as simple as we don't want our family to worry about us.
Yeah.
Right. We want them to know that we're okay. We're going to make it through. So any form of us just being vulnerable in the sense of sharing what's really, you know, affecting us at that time, we might avoid that. Right. And people certainly avoid treatment in general, as we alluded to earlier, just because of how they might be perceived by other people. And actually, there are still to this day, I want to do some legislature work or working with legislatures at some point, but I also do workers' compensation work. And I've seen cases, and this is what happens. So I'll give you the most egregious sort of example, of course, without identifying the
Sure.
person. But I had a client who had a workers' compensation case, and so the other side, or the attorneys, they seek to diminish your case. They want you to go away. They don't give you anybody. They want you to go away. And so they try to find anything and everything to basically diminish your case. So if you are saying, I now have this mental health condition based on what happened to me at work. That's what you're stating. The egregiousness happened where the opposing attorney, they requested the medical records of this person, and it was in her, I think she saw a therapist like 10, 15 years ago or something. She had the same insurance plan. And in the medical records, so she was like 56. Her mom died when she was 12 years old, and she sought therapy for depression, basically what it said in her record. And they used that against her. They said, you don't have depression because of what happened on your job. You have depression because your mom died when you were 12 years old and you've not ever gotten over it. And I thought to myself, like, what a piece of crap, because what that does is the exact opposite. So now you're reinforcing, maybe I should hide what's going on internally in my own personal life. Maybe I shouldn't see a therapist because it might be used against me 20, 30 years down the line. And I just think it's a bunch of crock, but I'm sure that other situations like that are happening. But once again, that's just kind of yet another facet of why stigma still exists.
I want to bring in some of that's an awful and a perfect example to explain why the stigma exists. But I want to bring in some of the comments, right? I'm going to acknowledge, actually, there's some doctors in the house. So soon to be right now, Mr. Vincent Anderson. He's going to be Dr. Anderson here in a moment. He's just acknowledging, enjoying the topic. And then Atira is in here, Dr. Charles. Yeah, she's been on the show as well. She's reminding us.
Dr. Charles.
Yes. She's, when we were talking about kind of the response and the reaction to us as students, that, it aligns with the bias of assuming that professionals of color operate from a deficit model. So when we really operate from a resilience and a surplus model, it's really like, I think it's just people don't understand. And I actually, let me bring in Atira. I remember Atira and I would go, so Atira, we went to graduate school together, all of us. Atira's my best friend. I remember we would go out to eat and we would notice people noticing us in our conversation. We would realize people truly do have no idea like how to kind of contextualize what it is to be like a young Black and brown individual, but then also to kind of be, getting your PhD and what that's like, and again, I talk about it with my students. There's no context, right? Like we're all unicorns. And I don't mean, because I'm not saying this to like brag about myself. I'm saying this as like, literally there's like 1%, 2%, 3%. You're for sure, you're super unicorn as a Black man with a, who has his doctorate. I don't even know if 1% of the world has, it fits into your category. I think I'm 3%,
Sure.
But anyway, it just, so I appreciate Atira's further contextualization. I want to go in a tiny different direction, still talking about this. Like, so if we're talking about all the ways that there are challenges and why stigma reduction, or why stigma exists, what's the idea? Like, what do you dream about? What do you wish mental health would look like? How do you wish we talked about it?
That's a really good question. Let me answer it in two different ways. The first way that I want to answer it is keeping in aligned with our stigma reduction sort of topic. And so this is kind of yet another thing of kind of what we can do. And essentially, when we see stigma taking place, when I say we, not just professionals, but everyone in general, that we identify stigma when it's happening, when we see other people that are saying things that are contributing to the stigma, that we challenge those thoughts and that we step up and say something, as opposed to just kind of letting it go or letting it slide. So there's a part of me that sees a world where people will know that if they make some underhand sort of comment that is insensitive within the field, that they'll be called on it. At least there's a strong chance that they'll be called on it. Now, the second part of your question, I think the obvious answer to that is let me preface it with this. In the Bay Area, there are, as far as I know, Black male psychologists under 60. There's 5 of us, and we're all completely booked, and we would like to see everybody, but we can't. And don't get me wrong, there's other therapists that aren't Black males that, of course, are taking on the workload as well. But I preface it with just, there's a huge need. And I got lots of ideas, lots of things that I want to do, including writing books. I got book titles and everything else, but I foresee there being some work to be done where you and I and other people who are like us and are in the field, we kind of got to do our part to kind of, bring in the young people. I mean, they got all sorts of, especially with tech making so much money and other forms of tech in the Bay Area, at least. Everybody wants to do tech out here, and coding and all those things are fine, but we're already behind. And I can only imagine when I get tired and I need a break. Now there's 4 black male psychologists in the entire Bay Area. So I preface that just to say I foresee a time where there are many, many therapists of all different ethnicities and religions and colors and sizes and shapes and all the rest of that. There's like an abundance of us out there. We are qualified. We are specialists. And when people need a therapist, that they have options. And I also even foresee some business that's out there where you call up and say, I got Anthem Blue Cross, and I'd like to see this therapist who specializes in this. And within a day, they call you and I got 10 options for you. Right now, it's exactly the opposite. My voicemail right now probably has 15 voicemails sitting there. And on a Friday night, I'm probably not going to get to it. And so that's kind of a problem solution sort of way to answer your question. Is I really just foresee like mental health in general just being like normal, and there being enough providers, to kind of capture everyone's needs, and mental health is not as big of an issue as a whole in society as it is now.
And that, and that normal happens, right, by us kind of coming on screen and having these conversations. And so I am super encouraged and excited about a piece of what's gone on in the pandemic, meaning like these lives, because you and I talked about this, that for a lot of people don't get to see my work. And actually my family comments on this. They're like, we actually get to see your work now.
Sure.
No, this is not a therapy session, right? But they're getting to see aspects of the work that, like, you and I work in really isolated spaces. It's usually just a client who's watching us, right? And so that's a positive, right, of many of our fields or things that we do that are providing education being able to be displayed. So I hope that this access to technology, or technology being used to be able to present our occupations, will help with that. Because you can't see, it's the whole concept of visual representation, right?
Sure.
If you don't see it, if you can't see it, you can't be it. It's really hard, like you're literally making it up, out of the ethers. And it's so much easier when you have an example.
Correct. And that's kind of exactly the reason why whenever anyone, small, medium, big, huge, has asked me to speak about some aspect of mental health, I'm always for it. I mean, I even did a news station, Sacramento ABC 10, and I did not know that it was going to be live. When I got to the studio, I thought, I remember my question was, well, when is it going to air? And they were like, it's going to air when we go on. And I just remember there was a small part of me that was like, oh God. But nonetheless, you find your way in anything that you do in life that you've never done before. You're not going to be your best at it. And as you've done it more, you get a little bit better at it, including teaching, which is, I'm sure we can all empathize with each other on that.
For sure. And here you are doing another live. I wanted to ask you, because you brought it up and we only have a little bit more time left. The time goes so quickly. How are services shifting and changing? So like you, as you're seeing clients using telemental health, what are some of the most important differences you're noticing?
I would say just the general concept of technology in and of itself. Telehealth, if we didn't, the internet has actually only truly been out and abundant since like the early 90s. And even then it was pretty minimal. But imagine if we didn't have the internet kind of up and just throughout the entire country, we would be kind of out of luck when it came down to COVID-19. So technology has helped with that. I can remember even doing a couple different, like as participants, doing a couple different research projects on. I remember doing one where it was like in a chat room. I was doing therapy in a chat room. I remember another one where it just was kind of asking about. Was that
I'm
your?
thinking, was
Was
it
that
Dr.
your?
No, that wasn't mine. But,
Okay.
or that might have been Amanda's project. Sorry, we're just
Okay,
all.
okay. No, sure, sure. But I remember doing that. And then I also just remember, not necessarily overtly, but I remember professors just kind of talking, not really positively about the concept of telehealth, right? And it's like, I remember like the not being able to see one's nonverbal was like the best rationale for it, but it wasn't really a lot above and beyond that. And I, not to beat up on our professors or anything. It's just whatever they haven't done and don't have experience with, they're not going to be just jumping up and down to make it happen. But in this world of telehealth and the internet being high speed and everything else, I've been able to continue to work throughout the entire COVID, and we have more clients than we've ever had because we had the clients we were already seeing, plus the new people who are going through their own personal situations, COVID related or not. And so, but not even just the internet, but just the ability for us to apply technology to our work as well. So you did a breathing technique, which I very much enjoyed. And I do a good amount of just kind of visual imagery, and I have a biofeedback machine that I use. And so I just really feel like the continued implementation of technology is a big, huge benefit to our field. And you and I both know all you really need is two chairs and two people. That's all you really need. But if you can kind of add some fluff on top of it, it can enhance the experience.
Absolutely. And actually, that's such a good reminder for the fact that, like, if people are looking, our youngsters, right? Like you said, if they're looking for careers, yes, I definitely have job security, you guys, in this pandemic.
Definitely.
I have, I'm sure like you, I have too much work. Like
Sure.
I could give it away. And similar to what you said, I am being asked. I am being asked by individuals like, okay, I want to find a therapist of color. Like, how do I, where do I find this person? And I'm feeling oftentimes at a loss of like, I mean, I know the websites to direct people to, but it is challenging because I know you're in Oakland, I know this person's over here. I know that, but there's only one of you,
Sure.
and then before we weren't able to kind of work across state lines. And it's not so much that we're allowed to now, just sort of the pandemic has allowed us to relax the nation to relax, those requirements. And I hope that will persist, because what it is resulting in is people being able to work more so with the individuals or the professionals that align with them.
Correct.
And that's a good thing, and yeah, and for sure, I think, like you said, I remember, I don't know, I remember one of the professors doing the
Maybe
work.
we had more classes together than what I remember, because clearly we have some of the similar experiences.
Well, and it was just, I mean, I think we're only a year apart, you know what I mean? So we just knew what was going on. But yeah, and I remember kind of being like, how's that gonna work? But I will say that, you guys, for me, I feel that the best therapy session, the times that I'm the best therapist is actually over the phone. And the reason why that works the best for me is because I don't doubt myself. So anything that I feel or that I experience, I know that I'm experiencing it in an intuitive sense from my client, as opposed to when you're across from me. And even when I'm looking at you on a screen, I start to question, like, wait, did I make that up? Or is it just me? Or, whatever. Whereas if I don't see you and I feel something, I can trust it, and so we all have a learning curve and a growing curve to accept the role of technology in our life. And we're being pushed to accept it even more during this year. And I hope some things stay. I'm going to give you the last word. So you have people saying, that they're appreciating the conversation, right? They're appreciating the topic. But what do you want to leave people with about this whole concept of stigma reduction and the importance of mental health?
Yeah, my thoughts as we're getting close here on time is I'm really optimistic, right? Given what you and I just both mentioned about how much work we have and we got too much and so forth, that's an indicator, right? That first of all, the general population is digesting the concept of mental health and its importance. But I'm really optimistic that with some creative minds, and we want to interconnect the different disciplines too. So there could be someone really smart who is an engineer who creates something that makes our life even easier as therapists and psychologists. But I'm very optimistic that with continued abundance of healthcare, as we know, ACA in the form of it at least, that mental health will, in time, not have a stigma. I'm really looking forward to, and I hope, and I'm optimistic that before I die, there will be no mental health stigma, and that anyone who makes a decision, whether they want to work in the field or they want to see a therapist, it will just be so normalized that no one will think twice about it. So I'm hoping that everyone shares my sentiment in that, and that they have the same level of optimism I do with respect to that, provider or not.
Absolutely. And that'll, I would just add to that, and that'll be accessible, right? Because that it's accessible to all, right? Which is what you were saying and inferring, that we don't have these barriers, right, around insurance, because it makes a difference if you can solve your problem through a medicalized model, as opposed to if you can solve your problem through a legal model, right? That those points of access are so important and really do make a difference in our lives. So, all right, Jaseon, Dr. Outlaw, super good to see you. We grew up.
Likewise. This was fun. I'll be honest with you. I was like, I agreed to something on a Friday night, and then as we've gone through it, I really enjoyed this discussion with you today.
It's BGSA without.
This is true. This is very true.
All right, everyone. Have a beautiful weekend, you guys. Attend to your mental health. Actually, I'm going to task our audience with commit to yourself. Write something down of how you're going to attend to your mental health this weekend. And then next week in the chats, and let us know. Dr. Outlaw's email address is there in the ticker. And then I will go back here in a moment and put in his website for all of you who are interested in connecting with him. All right, everyone. Take care of yourselves.